Every Tuesday at 7 p.m., my mom hosts a prayer circle at our family church, St. Matthew's Lutheran on Colfax Avenue. It's this small group of maybe 8 to 10 people who've been meeting for years. There's Mrs. Henderson, who's 80-something, and always brings those butter cookies from the grocery store. Tom Brady, not the football player, just a guy with the same name who works at the post office. My mom's friend Linda, who she met at the church bake sale 5 years ago. A few others come and go, but these are the regulars. I never used to go to these meetings. I'd usually be at home watching Netflix or catching up on work emails. But about 6 months ago, my mom started asking me to come more often. Not in a pushy way, just casual mentions like, "We could use some young energy in our group," or, "Mrs. Henderson always asks about you." I think she was worried about me being alone too much since my divorce finalized last year. The Tuesday this happened was February 15th. I remember because it was the day after Valentine's Day, and I was feeling particularly single and sorry for myself. My mom called me around 5:30 p.m. while I was heating up leftover Thai food. "Sarah, honey, would you like to join us tonight? We're praying for the Johnson family. You remember them? Their son got deployed last month." I was tired, but something in her voice made me say yes. Maybe it was mom guilt, or maybe I just didn't want to spend another evening alone with my takeout container. I picked up my mom at 6:45 p.m. She was waiting by the front door with her purse and a thermos of coffee, like always. She wore her navy blue sweater, the one I gave her for Christmas 2 years ago, and comfortable walking shoes. We drove the 15 minutes to church mostly in silence, listening to the news on the radio. Something about a snowstorm coming in later that week. The church basement where they meet isn't fancy. There are about 12 folding chairs arranged in a circle on the gray carpet, fluorescent lights overhead that buzz a little, a small table in the corner with a coffee pot and paper cups. The heating system makes this clicking noise every few minutes. It's the kind of place where you can hear everything: people shifting in their chairs, someone's stomach growling, the traffic outside on Colfax. When we arrived, most of the group was already there. Mrs. Henderson waved at me and offered cookies from a plastic container. Tom was reading something on his phone. Linda was organizing some prayer cards she'd brought. My mom went around greeting everyone with hugs, asking about their week, their families, their health problems. We started around 7:10 p.m. They always begin with a general check-in, sharing prayer requests or things they're thankful for. Mrs. Henderson mentioned her granddaughter getting into college. Tom talked about his back pain improving. Linda asked for prayers for her neighbor who'd been diagnosed with diabetes. Then they moved into the actual praying. Now, I should mention that I'm not completely against religion or anything. I went to Sunday school as a kid, got confirmed, the whole thing. But I've always been uncomfortable with group prayer, especially the kind where people start talking out loud, getting emotional, saying things like, "I feel the Lord's presence," or "I'm receiving a message." This group wasn't usually that intense. Most of the time, they'd pray quietly. Maybe someone would speak up with a specific request, and that would be it. Pretty low-key, which is why I felt okay being there. But this particular night felt different from the start. I can't explain exactly how. The room seemed quieter than usual, even though it was the same number of people. Mrs. Henderson, who normally rustles around in her purse or adjusts her hearing aid, was completely still. Tom wasn't checking his phone every 5 minutes like he usually does. My mom was sitting directly across from me in the circle. She had her eyes closed, hands folded in her lap, looking peaceful like she always does during prayer. Linda was to her right, Mrs. Henderson to her left. I was watching my mom's face because, honestly, I was a little bored and didn't have much else to look at. They'd been praying for about 20 minutes. People had mentioned the Johnson family, some health issues, gratitude for various things. The room had that quiet, focused feeling you get when a group of people are all concentrating on the same thing. That's when I noticed my mom's breathing had changed. It got very slow and deep, more like she was sleeping than praying. Her hands, which had been folded normally, seemed to relax and fall slightly apart. Her face looked incredibly peaceful, more peaceful than I'd ever seen her, actually. I thought maybe she was just really getting into the prayer, you know? Sometimes people get emotional during these things. But then Mrs. Henderson opened her eyes and looked at my mom with this puzzled expression. Linda opened her eyes too, and I saw her glance at me with raised eyebrows. My mom was still breathing very slowly, very deeply. Her body looked completely relaxed, almost limp, but she was sitting upright in her chair, perfectly balanced. That's what was strange about it. She looked like she was asleep, but she wasn't slumping over or losing her posture at all. Tom must have noticed something too, because he opened his eyes and looked around the circle. A couple of other people did the same, but nobody said anything. We all just sat there, watching my mom, who seemed completely unaware that anything unusual was happening. The thing is, nothing dramatic occurred. She didn't start speaking in tongues or crying or anything like that. She just sat there looking incredibly peaceful, while the rest of us became increasingly aware that something was different. It lasted maybe 5 more minutes before she opened her eyes normally and looked around like nothing had happened. "Did I miss anything?" she asked, and her voice sounded exactly the same as always. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "No, dear, we were just finishing up, but I could tell from the way people were looking at each other that everyone had noticed something." After we said our closing prayer and started putting away the chairs, Linda came over to me. "Your mom seemed very present tonight," she said carefully. "Very peaceful." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. In the car on the way home, I asked my mom how she was feeling. "Good," she said. "Refreshed. Sometimes when I pray with the group, I feel like I can really let go. You know? Just trust completely." I wanted to ask her more about it, but I wasn't sure what questions to ask. What was I going to say? "Mom, did you feel like you were somewhere else for a few minutes?" It would sound crazy. That night, I called my sister Jessica, who lives in Portland. I told her about the prayer meeting and how Mom seemed different. "Different how?" Jessica asked. "I don't know, just more relaxed than usual, but in a weird way." "Mom's always been intense about her faith stuff," Jessica said. "Maybe she's just getting more into it as she gets older." But that wasn't it exactly. My mom has always been religious, but this was something else. It was like she'd been somewhere else entirely for those few minutes, somewhere that made her incredibly calm and happy. I didn't think much more about it until the following Tuesday. I decided to go to the prayer group again, partly because I was curious and partly because my mom seemed so pleased that I'd joined them the week before. This time, I paid more attention from the beginning. I watched my mom's face, her posture, her breathing. For the first 15 minutes or so, everything was normal. She prayed with her eyes closed, occasionally nodding when someone mentioned a specific request, looking like her regular self. But then it happened again, that same deep, slow breathing, the same incredibly peaceful expression, the same perfect posture despite looking completely relaxed. This time, I timed it on my phone discreetly. It lasted exactly 7 minutes. And again, when she opened her eyes, she seemed completely normal. No awareness that anything unusual had occurred. Mrs. Henderson pulled me aside afterward. "Your mom has such a beautiful prayer presence," she said. "I've been in prayer groups for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone achieve that level of peace. It's like she's receiving something special." I nodded, but inside I was starting to feel uncomfortable. What exactly was happening to my mom during these prayers? And why didn't she seem to remember or notice anything unusual? When I got home that night, I did what any 30-year-old would do. I Googled it. I searched for things like deep meditation during prayer, and religious trance states, and peaceful breathing during group prayer. I found articles about contemplative prayer and mystical experiences, but nothing that exactly described what I was seeing with my mom. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Was this normal for people who are really religious? Was my mom experiencing something spiritual that I couldn't understand because of my own skepticism? Or was there something medical going on that I should be worried about? I decided I would keep going to the Tuesday prayer meetings, at least for a while, to see if it happened again. I told myself I was being a good daughter, making sure my mom was okay. But truthfully, I was fascinated. In all my 30 years, I'd never seen my mother look as peaceful and content as she did during those strange moments of prayer. What I didn't know was that what I'd witnessed so far was nothing compared to what was coming. The real event, the one that would change everything I thought I knew about my mom and about reality itself, was still 3 weeks away. All I knew then was that something unusual was happening, and I was the only one who seemed to be paying attention to it. Everyone else in the prayer group just accepted it as part of my mom's deep faith. But I've always been someone who notices details, who asks questions, who wants to understand how things work. I had no idea that some questions don't have answers you can Google. Some things that happen in this world don't fit into any category you can research or explain. Some experiences can only be witnessed, remembered, and wondered about for the rest of your life. The Tuesday that changed everything was March 8th. I remember the exact date because I wrote it down in my phone afterward, along with the time and everything else I could recall. I had this feeling I was going to need to remember every detail. I almost didn't go that night. I'd been fighting a cold all week, and after work I just wanted to go home and sleep. But my mom had called around lunchtime, mentioning that Mrs. Henderson had been asking about me again, and Tom had brought some pamphlet he wanted to share with the group. The usual Tuesday routine. "You don't have to come if you're not feeling well, honey," she said, but I could hear in her voice that she hoped I would. So I picked her up at 6:45 p.m. like always. She was wearing her gray cardigan this time, the one with the small buttons, and she'd brought homemade cookies instead of her usual thermos of coffee. She seemed more excited than usual about the meeting. "Linda said she has some wonderful news to share tonight," Mom told me as we drove through the light evening traffic. "And Tom's been reading about different prayer techniques. I think tonight might be special." I should have paid more attention to that comment. Looking back, it's like she somehow knew something was going to happen. The church basement felt different when we arrived. I can't explain exactly how, but the air seemed thicker somehow, more charged. Mrs. Henderson was already there, arranging her cookies on paper plates. Tom was setting up an extra chair because apparently someone new was coming. Linda was there with her daughter, Rachel, who I'd met a few times before but who didn't usually attend the prayer meetings. "Rachel wanted to experience our group tonight," Linda explained to my mom. "She's been going through a difficult time with her job situation, and I thought our prayers might help." So, we had 9 people, instead of the usual 8. We arranged the chairs in our circle, and I ended up sitting between Tom and Mrs. Henderson, directly across from my mom again. Rachel sat next to her mother, and there was a nervous energy about her that I recognized from my own first few meetings. We started with the usual check-in around 7:15 p.m. Mrs. Henderson talked about her physical therapy going well. Tom shared his excitement about the new prayer techniques he'd been reading about, something called contemplative prayer, that involved deeper breathing and letting go of conscious thoughts. Linda announced that her son had gotten a promotion at work, which was her good news. When it was my mom's turn, she just smiled and said she was grateful for our small community and for having me there with her. She seemed calm but alert, like she was anticipating something. Rachel shared her job stress and asked for prayers about a big interview she had coming up. Her voice was a little shaky, and I felt bad for her. I remembered that feeling of uncertainty, especially after my divorce when everything in my life felt unstable. Then we moved into the prayer portion of the meeting. Tom suggested we try some of the contemplative techniques he'd been reading about. "It's about releasing control and allowing ourselves to be completely open to whatever we might receive," he explained. I wasn't thrilled about changing the routine, but everyone else seemed interested, so I went along with it. We closed our eyes and started with some deep breathing exercises. Tom guided us through focusing on our breath, letting our minds become quiet, releasing any expectations or worries. For the first few minutes, it felt like any other meditation exercise I'd tried before. I could hear the familiar sounds of the basement, the clicking heater, distant traffic, someone's stomach gurgling. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat softly a couple of times, but gradually, the room became quieter. Not just in terms of noise, but quieter in a way I'd never experienced before. It was like the very air around us had become still and focused. Even my own breathing seemed louder than usual. I opened my eyes slightly to look around, and I could see that everyone was deep in concentration. Rachel had this intense look on her face, like she was working really hard at the praying. Tom's forehead was slightly wrinkled in concentration. Linda looked peaceful, but focused. And my mom looked exactly like she had during the previous 2 meetings. That same incredibly deep, slow breathing, that same perfectly peaceful expression, that same mysterious, perfect posture despite appearing completely relaxed. Except this time, something else was happening. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe I was getting dizzy from the breathing exercises, or maybe the fluorescent lights were creating some kind of optical illusion. But as I watched my mom, she seemed to be sitting slightly higher in her chair than everyone else. I blinked hard and looked again. No, she was definitely higher up. Not dramatically, maybe just an inch or two, but clearly higher than she should have been if she was sitting normally in her folding chair. I looked down at her feet. Her shoes weren't touching the floor. I'm not exaggerating this or making it sound more dramatic than it was. I'm telling you exactly what I saw. My mother was sitting in her chair in a perfect upright position, breathing slowly and peacefully, with her feet suspended about 3 inches off the carpet. My heart started beating so fast I was sure everyone could hear it. I looked around the circle to see if anyone else had noticed, but everyone still had their eyes closed and seemed absorbed in their prayer. Even Rachel, who had been so nervous earlier, looked completely focused. I stared back at my mom. She was still floating, that's the only word for it, about 3 inches above her chair seat. Her navy blue slacks hung normally around her legs. Her hands were folded in her lap, exactly like always. Her breathing was still that same deep, peaceful rhythm I'd noticed in the previous meetings. But she was not touching anything. Not the chair, not the floor, nothing. I don't know how long I sat there staring at her. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. I kept thinking I should say something, or wake her up, or alert the others. But what would I say? Excuse me, everyone, but my mom appears to be floating, and there was something else that kept me quiet. She looked so incredibly peaceful, so content, that I was afraid if I interrupted whatever was happening, I might harm her somehow. Have you ever watched someone sleeping who looks perfectly happy and relaxed, and you don't want to wake them even though you probably should? It was like that, except 1,000 times more intense. The strangest part was that it seemed completely natural to her. She wasn't struggling or trying to control what was happening. She wasn't showing any signs of being surprised or afraid. She just floated there like it was the most normal thing in the world. I became aware that my breathing had gotten very shallow and fast, the opposite of what we were supposed to be doing. I tried to calm down and breathe more normally, but I couldn't stop watching my mom hovering above her chair. Then, as gradually as it had started, she began to lower back down. I watched her body slowly descend until her feet touched the floor again, and she was sitting normally in her chair. The transition was so smooth and gentle that it looked like someone had just turned down the volume on gravity. The moment her feet touched the ground, she opened her eyes and looked around the circle with a completely normal expression. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "I feel so refreshed." Everyone else started opening their eyes and stirring. Mrs. Henderson stretched her arms. Tom rubbed his face and smiled. Linda reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand. "How do you feel, dear?" my mom asked Rachel. "I felt such strong prayers for you tonight." Rachel nodded, looking emotional. "I feel much more peaceful about everything. Thank you all so much." Nobody else seemed to have noticed anything unusual. They started talking about how powerful the prayer time had been, how peaceful they felt, how they should definitely try the contemplative approach again next week. I sat there feeling like I was in some kind of parallel universe. Had I really just watched my mother float 3 feet off the ground for several minutes while 9 other people sat in the same room completely unaware of it? Mrs. Henderson was packing up her leftover cookies. Tom was folding chairs. Linda and Rachel were hugging goodbye. Everything was completely normal except for the fact that I felt like I was going to throw up. "Sarah, honey, are you okay?" my mom asked me. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Just tired from this cold I've been fighting." "Well, let's get you home then," she said, putting her arm around my shoulders like she'd done when I was a child. In the car, I couldn't think of anything to say. My mom chatted normally about how lovely the evening had been, how much she enjoyed having Rachel there, how she thought the new prayer technique had worked well for everyone. "Did you feel anything different tonight?" I finally asked. She thought about it for a moment. "You know, I did feel particularly peaceful, more than usual even, like I was able to let go completely and just trust. It's hard to describe." "Do you remember the whole prayer time?" "Of course, honey. Why do you ask?" But she didn't remember. I could tell from her casual tone and the way she was already moving on to talking about other things. Just like the previous meetings, she had no awareness that anything unusual had occurred. When I got home, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. I considered all the logical explanations I could think of. Maybe I'd been lightheaded from the breathing exercises. Maybe the fluorescent lights had created some kind of visual distortion. Maybe I'd been more tired from my cold than I realized, and had dozed off briefly and dreamed the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't been asleep. I remembered every detail too clearly. The way her feet had hung in the air, the way she'd lowered back down so smoothly, the way everyone else had been completely unaware of what was happening. I called Jessica that night, even though it was late in Portland. "Jess, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not think I'm losing my mind." "Okay, that's not a promising way to start a conversation," she said. "What's going on? Have you ever heard of people floating during prayer? Like actually floating in the air?" There was a long pause. "Sarah, are you okay? Are you taking any new medications for your cold?" I told her everything I'd witnessed, trying to be as factual and detailed as possible. I could hear her moving around in her apartment, probably making coffee or tea the way she always does when she's processing something complicated. "So, let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "You think Mom was literally floating in the air during a prayer meeting and nobody else noticed?" "I know how it sounds. It sounds like you were stressed and tired and maybe experiencing some kind of hallucination. Have you been sleeping okay? Have you been under a lot of pressure at work?" I couldn't blame her for being skeptical. I would have reacted the same way if she'd called me with a story like this. "What if it really happened?" I asked. "Then I guess Mom has discovered some kind of superpower," Jessica said, but not in a mean way. "Look, Sarah, I love you, and I know you're not crazy. But floating during prayer isn't exactly a thing that happens in real life. Maybe you should talk to someone about the stress you've been under since the divorce." After we hung up, I spent the next 2 hours on my laptop, researching everything I could find about levitation, religious experiences, and unexplained phenomena. I found stories about saints who supposedly levitated during prayer, but those were all from hundreds of years ago and probably exaggerated over time. I found some stuff about meditation and out-of-body experiences, but nothing that described what I'd seen with my mom. I also found a lot of websites about hallucinations caused by stress, sleep deprivation, and medical conditions. The rational part of my mind kept telling me that this was the most likely explanation for what I thought I'd witnessed, but I couldn't shake the memory of seeing my mom's shoes hanging 3 inches above the carpet, or the way she'd looked so perfectly at peace while defying gravity. I made a decision that night. I would go to next Tuesday's prayer meeting with my phone ready to record video. If it happened again and I captured it on camera, I'd have proof. If it didn't happen, or if the video showed nothing unusual, I'd know I needed to talk to a doctor about what might be going on with my perception or my mental health. Either way, I was going to find out the truth about what was happening to my mother during those Tuesday night prayers. What I didn't know was that the next meeting would be the last one where I had any doubt about what I was seeing. What I didn't know was that some experiences are so far beyond normal reality that even video evidence can't fully capture them. What I didn't know was that I was about to witness something that would make the floating seem minor by comparison. I spent that entire week obsessing over what I was going to do on Tuesday. I practiced holding my phone discreetly, figured out how to start recording without looking at the screen, and even tested the camera quality in low-light conditions in my own basement. I felt ridiculous, but I needed to know the truth. By Monday night, I'd convinced myself that nothing would happen. I'd probably imagined the whole thing, or at least exaggerated it in my memory. Maybe I'd see my mom sitting normally in her chair like always, and I could finally put this weird episode behind me and get back to my regular life. Tuesday, March 15th came, and I felt nervous all day at work. My colleague Janet asked me twice if I was feeling okay because I kept zoning out during meetings. I told her I was still getting over my cold, which was sort of true since I still had a slight cough. I picked up my mom at the usual time. She was wearing her burgundy sweater and had brought a thermos of hot chocolate instead of coffee because the weather had turned colder. She seemed happy and relaxed, chatting about her neighbor's new puppy and some show she'd watched on PBS. "I have a good feeling about tonight," she said as we pulled into the church parking lot. "Sometimes you can just sense when the group is going to have a really meaningful time together." The basement felt normal when we arrived. Mrs. Henderson was there early as always. Tom was reading something on his tablet, and Linda was organizing some prayer cards. Rachel wasn't there this week, but there was a new person, an older man named Bill that Tom had invited. We arranged 8 chairs in our circle. I made sure to sit across from my mom again, and I positioned my phone in my lap where I could easily access it without drawing attention. My heart was already beating faster than usual. The check-in portion went normally. Mrs. Henderson mentioned her granddaughter's college acceptance again. Tom talked about his back feeling much better. Linda shared some concern about her mother's health. The new guy, Bill, seemed a little uncomfortable, but thanked everyone for including him. When it was my mom's turn, she said, "I'm just grateful for this community and for the way prayer brings us together. I always feel so blessed after our Tuesday meetings." Then we moved into the prayer time. Tom suggested we continue with the contemplative approach from last week since it had worked so well. Everyone agreed, so we started with the deep breathing exercises again. I closed my eyes for the first few minutes, trying to look normal while keeping my phone ready. The room gradually became quiet in that same intense way I'd experienced the week before. I could hear everyone's breathing slowly synchronizing into a peaceful rhythm. After about 10 minutes, I carefully opened my eyes to check on my mom. She was in that familiar state, the incredibly peaceful expression, the deep, slow breathing, the perfect posture despite appearing completely relaxed. But she was still sitting normally in her chair. I waited, watching her closely while trying to keep my own breathing steady. Maybe it wasn't going to happen this week. Maybe it really had been my imagination the previous time. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I saw her begin to rise again. This time I was ready. I quietly activated my phone's video recording and held it steady in my lap, pointing it toward my mom. My hands were shaking slightly, but I tried to keep the camera as still as possible. Just like the week before, she lifted smoothly off her chair until her feet were suspended several inches above the floor. But this time, something else happened. As I watched through my phone screen, she continued rising, not dramatically or quickly, but steadily and smoothly, until she was floating about 2 feet above her chair. 2 feet. I'm not exaggerating. My 62-year-old mother was floating 2 feet in the air in a church basement, while 7 other people sat around her with their eyes closed, completely unaware of what was happening. I kept the camera recording, trying to capture every detail. Her breathing remained that same deep, peaceful rhythm. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her face looked more serene than I'd ever seen it. She looked like someone experiencing the most beautiful dream of their life. But the most amazing part was how completely natural it seemed. There was no struggle, no effort, no sense that she was doing anything to make this happen. She just floated there like gravity didn't apply to her, like this was exactly where she was supposed to be. I managed to record for about 3 minutes before my hands started shaking so badly I was afraid I'd drop the phone. I carefully turned off the recording and just watched with my own eyes for the remaining time. She floated for what felt like forever but was probably about 5 more minutes. Then, just like the week before, she began to descend slowly and gently until she was sitting normally in her chair again. The transition was so smooth it was like watching a leaf settle onto the ground on a calm day. The moment her body touched the chair, she opened her eyes and smiled at the circle. "That was wonderful," she said softly. "I feel like I was somewhere very peaceful." Everyone else started opening their eyes and stretching. Mrs. Henderson mentioned how relaxed she felt. Tom said the contemplative prayer was really working well for the group. Bill looked emotional and thanked everyone for such a moving experience. I sat there holding my phone, knowing I had video evidence of something that shouldn't be possible, watching everyone act like nothing unusual had occurred. After we cleaned up and said our goodbyes, I walked to the car with my mom in complete silence. My mind was racing, but I had no idea what to say. "You're very quiet tonight, honey," she said as we drove home. "How did you feel about the prayer time?" "It was intense," I managed. "Yes, I felt that too. Sometimes when I'm praying with the group, especially lately, I feel like I'm able to let go completely, like I'm not even in my body anymore, just surrounded by this incredible peace and love. It's hard to explain." She had no idea, no memory at all of floating 2 feet in the air for 8 minutes. When I got home, I immediately went to my laptop and transferred the video file. My hands were still shaking as I opened it and pressed play. The video was clear. I could see the circle of people, the basement setting, everything exactly as I remembered. I could see my mom sitting in her chair with that peaceful expression, and I could see, absolutely clearly, that she was not touching the chair. She was suspended in the air, exactly as I'd witnessed with my own eyes. I watched the video 4 times in a row. Each time, I saw the same thing. My mother, floating in midair during a prayer meeting, while everyone around her remained completely unaware. I called Jessica immediately, even though it was almost midnight in Portland. "Sarah, do you know what time it is?" She answered groggily. "Jess, I have video." "Video of what?" "Mom, floating. I recorded it happening." There was a long pause. "Okay, I'm awake now. Send it to me." I sent her the video file and waited on the phone while she watched it. I could hear her moving around her apartment, probably getting out of bed and going to her computer. "Sarah," she said after a few minutes, and her voice sounded different. "What am I looking at here?" "That's what I've been trying to tell you. Mom floats during prayer meetings. She has no idea it's happening. This can't be real. This has to be some kind of camera malfunction or digital glitch or something." "It's not a glitch, Jess. I saw it with my own eyes, and then I recorded it to prove I wasn't losing my mind." We stayed on the phone for another hour, with Jessica watching the video over and over while I answered her questions. What was the lighting like? Was anyone else moving during the recording? Could it be some kind of optical illusion? Had I edited the video in any way? Finally, she said, "I don't know what to think about this. I mean, I can see what's in the video, but people don't just float in the air. There has to be some explanation." "What if there isn't?" I asked. "What if this is just something that happens and we don't understand it? Then I guess we have to figure out what to do about it." That was the moment I realized that everything had changed. Jessica might not understand what was happening any more than I did, but she believed that I'd captured something real. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't hallucinating. Whatever was happening to my mom during these prayer meetings was actually happening. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about it constantly. I researched religious experiences, mystical phenomena, and unexplained events. I read about saints and mystics throughout history who reportedly experienced levitation during prayer. I learned that there was actually a term for it in religious literature: ecstatic levitation. But all of those stories were from centuries ago, and most scholars seem to think they were exaggerated or symbolic rather than literal. I couldn't find any modern, documented cases of people actually floating during prayer. I also couldn't stop thinking about my mom's description of feeling like she wasn't in her body anymore, surrounded by peace and love. What if what I was witnessing wasn't just physical levitation, but some kind of genuine spiritual experience that happened to have a physical manifestation? I decided I needed to talk to someone with more knowledge about religious experiences than I had. The following Sunday, I went to church with my mom for the first time in months. After the service, I asked to speak privately with Pastor Williams, who's been at St. Matthew's for about 10 years. "Pastor Williams," I said, "I wanted to ask you about mystical experiences in prayer. Do you believe that people can have physical manifestations during deep spiritual moments?" He looked thoughtful. "There are certainly accounts throughout Christian history of people experiencing extraordinary things during prayer. Why do you ask?" I told him about my mom's deep prayer states, though I didn't mention the floating. I just described how peaceful she became and how she seemed to lose awareness of her surroundings. "Your mother has always impressed me with the depth of her faith," he said. "It doesn't surprise me that she would experience profound peace during prayer. Some people are naturally more open to mystical experiences than others. But what if someone experienced something more dramatic during prayer? Something that seemed to defy normal physical laws?" Pastor Williams was quiet for a moment. "I believe that God works in ways we don't always understand. If someone was experiencing something that brought them closer to the divine and didn't harm them or others, I would be inclined to see it as a blessing rather than something to worry about." That conversation helped me feel a little less alone with what I was witnessing. Even if I couldn't tell him the full truth, at least I knew that a religious authority figure wouldn't automatically dismiss unusual spiritual experiences. But I still felt like I was carrying this enormous secret that I couldn't share with anyone except Jessica. I couldn't tell my mom because she didn't remember it happening. I couldn't tell the prayer group because they weren't seeing what I was seeing. I couldn't tell my friends because they'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. I kept going to the Tuesday meetings, and it kept happening. Not every week, but often enough that I started to expect it. My mom would enter that deep prayer state, and sometimes she would remain in her chair, and sometimes she would float. I stopped recording after that first video because I realized that having evidence didn't actually make it any easier to understand or accept. The floating itself became less shocking to me over time, but I never stopped being amazed by the look of perfect peace on my mom's face during these experiences. Whatever was happening to her, it clearly brought her joy and contentment in a way I'd never seen before. 3 months have passed since that first night I witnessed the floating. I still go to most of the Tuesday prayer meetings. I still watch my mom with a mixture of wonder and protectiveness. I still can't fully explain what I'm seeing, and she still has no memory of it happening. But I've come to accept that there are things in this world that don't fit into our normal understanding of how reality works. I've learned that being a witness to something extraordinary doesn't mean you have to understand it completely. Sometimes it's enough to just be present and pay attention. My relationship with my mom has deepened in ways I didn't expect. Not because of the floating itself, but because witnessing something so far beyond ordinary experience has made me more aware of how much mystery surrounds us all the time. I look at her now and see not just my practical, religious mother, but someone who has access to experiences I can't even imagine. I still don't know if what happens to her during those prayer meetings is a miracle, a mystical experience, some unknown natural phenomenon, or something else entirely. I've stopped needing to categorize it. I've learned that some questions don't have clear answers, and that's okay. What I do know is that every Tuesday night, I have the privilege of witnessing something that has taught me there's far more to existence than what we can see and touch and measure. Whatever is lifting my mother off the ground during those prayer meetings has also lifted something in me, a limitation I didn't even know I had about what's possible in this world. She still doesn't remember any of it, but I remember everything, and I always will.